Welcome back to episode 3 of Mindshift. In episodes 1 and 2, we dug deep into copper, exploring its crucial role in the energy transition. This episode, The Iron Giant, unpacks the shift towards green steel, a cleaner, low-carbon alternative to conventional steelmaking. We'll explore what green steel really means, the technology and innovation behind it, and the economic and environmental challenges. Joining us today is Stuart Hayton, Divisional Vice President of Comminution at Weir, an industry expert with deep insight into steel production and its future. And we're also joined by Sean Parsons, Director of External Affairs at SAE Renewables, a leader in renewable energy. Sean, Stuart, thank you both so much for joining us. So just to start us off, perhaps you could both give us a bit of background why you're both so passionate about green steel and why it's so timely to be talking about it.
Absolutely. So I'm passionate about green steel because I've seen the opportunity in action. I've worked for a company and I've seen organisations trying to innovate, trying to unlock green steel. And I really see the opportunity, see the potential. It shouldn't be a problem. I really want people to realise that steel can be part of a low carbon, net zero future, a thriving economy, creating jobs and opportunity. And not just a problem. But there's a lot of barriers to overcome to get there.
Well, we'll talk about some of those in the next half an hour or so. But Stuart, for us, can you paint that picture?
Yeah, look, exactly what Sean said. I'm fortunate I work for a business like Weir where we genuinely can make mining and minerals better. And steel is part of it, but there's many other minerals as well that are associated that we also feel that we can make a huge difference. So, yeah, it's just, it's fantastic to be really actively involved in making the industry better.
Sean, I touched on it in the introduction a little bit, but for those at home, can you briefly explain a little bit more and expand on what steel actually is and why it's so essential in everyday life, from buildings to appliances?
Yeah, absolutely. So steel it's the backbone to our society. It's the most commonly used, most produced metal in the world. Okay, it's fundamental to everything that we do. And that goes from, I think the majority of steel goes into construction, so about 50%. But then it's also into our vehicles, our industries, and then our end products, the dining tables we sit at every day. So steel is fundamental. In terms of what you get two different sorts of steel making, essentially. You get primary steel from iron ore, and that's the vast majority. That's 2/3 of steel comes from primary steel. Then you get secondary steel making through electric arc furnaces, which is taking scrap metal and then remelting it down and producing secondary products. So they're the two ways of producing it.
And why is decarbonising it so important? Why does that matter?
It's so important because it's the biggest single emitter in the world of carbon emissions. That the production of steel is it. It's the biggest contributor. In terms of industry, it accounts for about 25% of industrial emissions. So it's fundamental to our society, yet it's also the biggest contributor of what is ultimately harming our society. So that is why we have to find a solution to make it greener and sustainable.
And Stuart, the solutions already exist, don't they? Tell us about that, because we'd like to talk today about green steel. So maybe you can tell us what green steel is and how that differs from traditional steel production.
Okay, so green steel is the game changer. It will really radically alter how we produce such an important material. Two core technologies. One is electric arc furnace that Sean talked about. The other one is hydrogen-based DRI, so direct reduced iron. Thanks for asking. So let's start with electric arc furnace. That's used in recycling. And basically you would use electricity, hopefully from renewables, to melt scrap steel and then redeploy. Importantly, that methodology has a carbon reduction of 70% compared to contemporary methodologies. And again, to Sean's earlier point, if 1/3 of steel supply is coming from recycling, that has a really massive impact on global supply chain. Hydrogen DRI uses hydrogen gas as opposed to carbon or carbon-based fuel to reduce iron ore into metallic iron. The byproduct of that process is actually water vapor, so H2O, which is not a bad thing. And that compares favorably to carbon, which is the byproduct of traditional methodologies. The carbon benefits of hydrogen DRI is more than 90%. So really, really massive. So those are the two technologies and those are the benefits that they bring.
So this is a good news story then.
It absolutely is.
Sean, maybe looking at your experience with clean energy infrastructure, how does green steel contribute to and support building the technologies and equipment like wind turbines or electric vehicles that are going to be crucial and are already crucial for the clean energy transition?
Yeah, so it's really important. And just to kind of pick up as well this green steel point as well, just to be absolutely clear, green steel is steel produced with renewable power. It's not just recycled steel. Green steel, to make it green, it needs to be powered by renewables. And there's a great example of that over in Europe, which is where Vestas, who are one of the big turbine manufacturers for wind turbines, they've actually partnered with ArcelorMittal and a direct powering electric arc furnace with a offshore wind farm, which is fantastic. So actually the blades are being produced using steel, proper green steel. So there are examples out there where it can happen. The challenge is they are few and far between, okay? And we need to be scaling up. We need to be unlocking this at an industrial scale because the problem's not small. Now, we've got 10,000 plus wind turbines around our shores in the UK, and none of those have been made using green steel. So there's great examples where it's starting to happen, but we need to accelerate it. And we need to embed it fully in the supply chain so that it becomes the norm and not the exception.
Stuart, do you, from your perspective, what is the industry mindset at the moment about green steel and how are we going to make it the norm? Are companies committed to making this shift or is it more talk than action at the moment?
No, I think the industry is. There's certainly clear evidence of that in the mining sector. But I think you also see it in the demand. So certainly big automotive is making a move to green steel for sure. You also see it in construction and infrastructure. So it's there. I think it's fair to say that Europe is leading the charge. It absolutely is. So if you consider the demand for iron ore over the next 5-6 years, it's forecast to be maybe 4% per year. You then look at the demand for green steel in the EU, it's more than 70% over that same time period. So that would speak to really buy-in from the EU that the green steel is the way forward. So I think there's real evidence of that.
Sure.
Sorry, just to build on that as well, which is, it's really interesting to understand when we talk about green steel, often the big things you talk about are renewable energy and the steel side. Well, actually, one of the biggest stories, which I never really appreciated, is it's the scrap side. It's actually the access to scrap metal. And what you see is the demand in Europe is because as our economies have this embedded steel already in them, they're coming to their life cycle where they're ready to be recycled. So we have an abundance of the material that can go in. We're investing more and more in renewables that bring down the price of the electricity that enable us to do it. So there is opportunity there. I think the challenge is how do you encourage that, as you said, Stuart, in other countries where they haven't necessarily got that scrap, and really try and kind of push it forward.
Let's talk a bit more about the challenges then and the barriers, because what would you say, Stuart, you've told us that it's there, it's possible, we know how to do it, so that's fantastic, but it's not happening everywhere, clearly, or very little. What are the key barriers, do you both think, to producing green steel, and are they inhibiting progress? Stuart?
There's the demand side for sure. If I look to the industry side, we've got to adopt new technology, but that technology's got to work. It's got to be cost effective. So there's that whole classical business case around any new technology, new innovation, and then it has to work. Mining sometimes gets perhaps unfair press for being rather conservative, but mining is an industry where safety has actually, without exception, the number one criteria. So any new solutions need to be safe, really safe. And then they need to be reliable, they need to bring tonnage, they need to be dependable. And if they can be sustainable and bring those benefits as well, then fine. But there's those real business questions that need to be answered as well. And I think the industry is waking up to the fact that we do need to change, but it is rather slow, actually predominantly because of the safety piece. So it really has to be a tried and tested solution because of the other things that are at stake on the mine side.
And do you feel confident that those tried and tested solutions are there? Is it going to be easy to accelerate this progress?
Yeah, and again, there's certainly evidence of that, and possibly we'll talk about it later. But there's certainly evidence of that, real life, that the technology is there and it is being adopted. But it's just taken time to really reach the tipping point and get into proper volume.
Do you have any examples of that technology?
So yeah, if I look at our own portfolio, if you look at our HPGR, so HPGR stands for high pressure grinding roll. So that technology, when used with, for example, a vertical stirred mill, that has the potential to drive down the energy consumption in a traditional mining flow sheet by up to 40%. Carbon emissions by more than 50%. And that's just in the distinct part of comminution. Comminution, by the way, is a word that the mining industry uses to take big rocks and make them small rocks. And then those small rocks can then go and be processed. So if you look at that comminution piece, then we have tried and tested technology that the industry is starting to embrace now because the benefits are there and they're real. And it's a dependable technology. But it needs to tick every box, and it then needs to also fulfill the business criteria of, is it going to pay for itself? What does the investment look like? Is it going to bring me an operational benefit, which is a cost benefit as well? And unfortunately it does. It ticks all boxes.
Sean, are there barriers that you think are present to the adoption of green steel on a broader basis?
Yeah, it's a really. I liken it to. I always talk about wanting to learn another language, and I say to my kids, I really want to learn to speak another language. And it's amazing when you sit down, or reel off the things. I can't get access to the app, or whatever reason I can come up, and there'll be 1,000. And really, it just comes down to willpower. It's basically it's habit, it's mindset that I'm going to sit down and I'm going to commit the time, the energy to learn a language, and changing and shifting an industry is a bit similar, really. The issues that Stuart's just written off, there's lots of issues. There's innovation issues, supply chain issues, all of these things. There's a lot of sunk costs. A lot of big companies have invested billions of pounds in existing infrastructure and existing steel that they need to get their money back from. So to come along and say, oh, by the way, that way is bad and you need to shift, it doesn't go down too well. But really, and I've tried doing this around the world. I've tried in the UK. I remember sitting there when I remember looking at Port Talbot, for example, which is a blast furnace in the UK, in Wales, and talking about the need to shift to the electric arc furnace and that. And it was such a backlash. So many people, you can't do that. No, you can't do it. It doesn't make the right grade steel. Oh no, there's too many impurities in recycled steel. Where's the electricity coming from? So we could spend multiple podcasts of yours talking about all the different challenges, but the reality is if people really wanted green steel to happen, there is no barriers right now that cannot be overcome. It's as simple as that.
So how do we make people really want it to happen then?
I wish I knew the answer to that, because it's I would say the £1 million question, but it's probably the game-changing question for saving our planet, really. It's that important. And I think that's where, for me, there is no silver bullet. There is nothing I can say, what we really need is government to change X policy, or we need business to adopt a Y approach. It is, or we as consumers need to stop buying houses that have so much steel in. It is everything. It's all of those factors need to come together. We need the consumers pushing up. We need the businesses taking responsibility. We need government putting the incentives and the frameworks in place. We need the safety officials to make sure it's done safely. If you get all of those factors in, it's there. And that's what gets me excited is we can do this, and it can be a catalyst for new industries, for growth, development, employment. But we need to club together to get that change.
And Stuart, do you think that we are clubbing enough together? Is collaboration happening across the mining and steel supply chain as well to make green steel commercially viable and possible?
Yeah, I think so. Look, we could always do better, but I've been in mining now for 12, 13 years, and certainly it is more collaborative, more transparent than it's ever been. So we've got great relationships with the miners, great relationships with engineering houses. We collaborate more with other industry players because we recognise that we don't actually have all the solutions. So we need to bring other solutions as part of a holistic thing with other players. And we are increasingly in direct contact with those downstream users. So, for example, we talk to big automotive directly because we want to understand what's driving that industry, so we can then take those learnings back to our solutions, so we can provide better solutions to our customers. So, I think it is getting better. We've had zero pushback from, for example, big automotive. They want to learn. They want to learn about the mining process so they can go and ask the right questions of the miners. But for sure, there's more work could be done. But again, I think everyone's pushing against an open door now.
Sean, let me come to you on the importance of unlocking green steel from this full value chain perspective. Can you unpack what that means in practice, and where do you see the biggest levers or gaps that need to be addressed?
Yeah, absolutely. So the theme of what we've been talking about is how important steel is and how it is the backbone of our society. But from the mining of the materials that go into it, or as I said, if you're looking at green steel, the steel that's already embedded, it's already made, it's just recycling and repurposing. You then go through to there's so many stages that piece gets through before you as an end user even get near it. From the mills that roll it, you have the billets, the ingots, you have tubes made, different sizes, re-rolled, reheated, shipped around the world multiple times, in making into products that then go into something that then makes something more. It is so interlaced in our whole society that if you imagine every single one of those stages adds value and creates jobs, every single one of them, from the transportation through to the mining, through to the shipping, through to the using, it is. And also, and this is again a really important point for me, which is they're really valued jobs. The communities I've been in which host steelworks, they are often third, fourth generation workers who care about what they do and they want to carry on doing it. And it's so fundamental that if you can, and often they get talked about being industries in decline. So to be able to give them a new opportunity, to be able to talk about steel and industry as a positive, not something we outsource, but something that we own, we grow, we thrive. It's part of our economy and our society again. I mean, that's it touches every point in our society and our life. So it's hard to kind of pick out all those different examples because it is so embedded in everything we have and do. So that's probably it for me.
Stuart, I wanted to ask you a little bit more in detail about ore grade as well, because many of our listeners might have heard that high-grade ore is a prerequisite for green steel. But what does that actually mean, and why is that important, and what are the implications of that? Okay,
so back to the hydrogen-based DRI. So certainly that is dependent on high-grade iron ore. No two ore bodies are the same. They're not. So they have different characteristics, different ore content. That's certainly the case for iron. And whilst high purity iron brings advantages, as it does in hydrogen-based DRI, more energy efficient, less heat, less waste because it's a purer ore body. A general rule of thumb is that high-grade iron ore is harder. That's generalization. The problem with that brings to the mining process is that the comminution, the big rock to small rock part of hard rock is you use more energy. So there's a balance there. There's a trade-off, right? So you look at it holistically, you get a downstream benefit, but you don't want that to be punitive at that particular moment in time, or else it becomes one of those obstacles. I'm not going to give you it because it's going to cost me too much at this moment in the food chain. So again, back to HPGR. By bringing that new technology to that process, we're able to do comminution on the hard rock ore in an energy efficient way, but a cost effective way. So we drive down the costs, but also drive down the energy consumption and the carbon consumption, which just then facilitates that benefit all the way down the stream. But it's a great question, because that was a potential blocker historically without that new technology.
How exciting is it for you, Stuart, to see new innovation and new technology like that coming through?
It really is exciting. And it, as I said, it is a traditionally conservative industry, so it's not without its frustrations, because some things are so apparent on paper, but why do we get the traction? And look, we've got some really forward-looking customers. Some are really pioneering the way forward, and we've benefited a lot from having really close relationships with them. But there's some great innovation coming through, but again, from a Weir standpoint, it's all about how do we move less rock, use less energy, use less water, or create less waste. So again, it just underpins everything that we're doing.
And are there other technologies that you can see coming through that you're both excited about and would like to highlight, Sean?
Yeah, so I think there's so much innovation going on. So when you talk about, and I'm focusing more on the green steel, the secondary steel making, so this recycled steel. So one of the challenges before was around when you recycle steel, it's the scrap you put in, you obviously end up with impurities. And that then impacts the quality, the grade of the steel that then can be used. Then it's limited on what downstream potential it can have. And that's been one of the constant arguments against it. Why we need to keep making primary steel, because scrap can't produce everything. And then what you see is actually the innovation, which some of the universities I've worked with and some of the companies I've worked with that look at ways at removing some of those impurities, both in terms of the actual process in the furnace, but also in terms of the innovation in the scrap side. So actually how you deal with scrap. What's interesting though, and can be frustrating, is when some of those innovations actually harm further downstream. And I'll give you an example of that. So one of the things we saw with some of the innovations in primary steel making was to make better steel for the auto sector. They added additives to the steel to make it better for their end use. Those additives make it harder to recycle the metal when it then comes round. So what you can get is one side of the fence trying to fix a problem and actually creating problems for the other side, which comes back to your question earlier on. And that bit we're talking about is that collaboration, that working together, which is when the two sides talk, it's so important, because what you don't want to do is innovate on one side and damage the other.
We've talked about primary steel and secondary steel, but primary steel can also be green, can it? Or
So the primary steel setting from an industry standpoint is that hydrogen-based DRI. That's green steel in terms of the mining industry and the way that we're looking at it.
And in terms of both of those technologies, which one is there one that's more adoptable, or is it always going to be kind of
both technologies are there, and I think that the recycling piece is always going to be a fundamental part of the supply chain, right? And that's a good thing. Right? There's nothing negative about that at all. And the more that we can recycle, the better. And steel is incredibly recyclable, right? It is probably the most recyclable thing out there. But as Sean said earlier, it's also got an incredibly long usable life, right? So it can take a long time before it comes into the recycle bit as well. So for me personally, I don't see a situation where recycling overtakes primary steel. I think it's always going to be both. I think we've got to improve the recycled methodology, but we've got to improve the primary steel methodology as well, and just keep driving the thing forward.
Just to challenge that a little bit, but for me, there's been numerous reports looking at how much embedded steel we have in our society globally. And there's a kind of consistent theme that we have enough embedded steel in our society right now that you could switch off every blast furnace today, and there is enough steel in our society to recycle it to keep our economies thriving and growing. That's it. So we don't need primary steel to continue. Now, we need to transition, and it needs to take time. But the reality is we keep making more and more steel when we don't recycle the steel we have. And it is primary steel currently is so wasteful. So wasteful. You make primary steel, of that you recycle a quarter of what you produce in the steel production, gets scrapped, doesn't get used, and then gets remelted and redone again. So what you're talking about, that's not green steel, that is just wasted steel. You are just wasting energy, steel, raw materials, the effort that Stuart and his team go to mine those materials, they are just being wasted in that primary steel cycle. So, as Stuart said, steel is such a recyclable product, the most recyclable product. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
Stuart, would you agree with that? And are we making moves, if you do agree with that, in terms of redressing that wastage?
Look, I think if you look at the battery metals demand, recycling, this is my personal opinion, I think recycling has a huge role to play. But that means everybody needs to step over the line and everybody needs to come to the party. And I don't know how realistic that is in the short term, right? So that's why my personal view is there'll be a demand for recycling. And I can see that growing. Right? I can see more of the supply chain coming from green recycled steel. But the rest of it should come from green primary steel, right? So let's just make the whole thing better. That's my personal view.
And the innovations and technologies are coming through and are there to make that process better.
Our innovation is about how do we make mining better, right? Because that's the market in which we serve. The mining innovation is looking at downstream use, but our innovations are looking at how do we make mining better.
Sorry, just an innovation from the energy side as well, which is something which, again, is really interesting. But so one of the really interesting things about electric arc furnaces is they're actually effectively batteries. So in this country, around the world, we're going around trying to look at how do we store renewable energy when it's, we've got abundance of wind or sun. How do you store it so that when it's less windy and less sunny, you've then got that power? Electric arc furnaces, you can switch on and off. They are industrial batteries. So one of the innovations, which we're seeing a little bit, but I'd love to see more and more of, and again, it comes back to that collaboration, is how do these industries actually become part of our energy infrastructure? So it's not just industrial infrastructure, it's seeing them as energy infrastructure as well. And there's a lot of innovation going on around how they can support the grid, how do they support our energy demands, as well as producing the metal that we need for our society.
And do we need, as consumers or other industries out there, do we need to be careful where something might be labelled green but perhaps isn't as much because maybe the production methods or where it's made have affected that? We hear about greenwashing. Is that a problem when it comes to steel?
Absolutely. And going back, green steel is not recycled steel. We actually, in the UK, we ship nearly all of our scrap metal. The vast majority of our scrap metal we send off mainly to Turkey, to India, and they melt it down using coal-fired power stations, and they make it into steel products that, guess what, we as a country buy back. So the emissions from that is vast. There's nothing green steel about that. The green steel bit comes in is when you're powering it with renewable power. That's the green part. That's the bit. If you decarbonise your electricity grid or direct power it through renewable power, recycling it, that's green steel. The other stuff isn't, and I'm focusing on the green steel side, not the primary stuff and the hydrogen stuff that Stuart's talking about. But from that side, absolutely. And we as consumers need to be aware of that. But also understanding when we talk about consumers, what do we mean? Because I'm not 50% of recycled steel goes into construction. I'm not. I walk around London and all this building work, the skyscrapers. There's your green steel right there. But I, as a consumer, don't have any say over how that goes in. So it's kind of understanding when we talk about consumers, do we mean consumers of the car I buy being from green steel, or as in a wider industry in terms of larger procurement construction companies?
It's probably both, though, and actually then it becomes down to awareness. It's just awareness of the topic, right? And again, that's why this podcast, I think, is so great. It's just about increasing awareness on such an important topic.
We've talked a lot throughout today's podcast about innovation. Clearly, innovation doesn't happen on its own. You're going to need a lot of great minds in a lot of different areas to drive that innovation. How are we going to attract those great minds? Are those great minds already in the industry? And what are the sorts of opportunities, Stuart?
So I said to you earlier, I've been in mining for 12, 30 years, and it is a brilliant, brilliant industry. I hope to stay mining until I hang up my boots. The amount of change is phenomenal. Great opportunities for innovators, great opportunities for STEM candidates, right? There absolutely are. We talked about different process in recycling, different process in primary. So there's clearly many roles for scientists to come and help improve our processes. If I look at the Weir offering, the Weir portfolio, we try to attract process people right now because, again, we want to better understand the process that we sell the products and solutions to. We are actively overlaying all of our offerings with digital. So we need digital skills. We then need the data analysis skills to recognize what's going on in digital in the field and in our factories. So we see STEM and attracting STEM resource as something that's really important. Personally, I think that STEM recruitment can also help us with attracting more females. And I really do. I mean, fortunately, we're not moving the needle in females in the industry. We're not really moving the needles in STEM females in the industry. If you look at, and they're pretty sad statistics, I think it's 35% of STEM graduates are female. 28% of STEM roles are filled by females. So there's already something going on there. So we got to do a better job in the recruitment. We've certainly got to do a better job in retention. So we lose females as well. I think also there's an opportunity for neurodiversity, bringing more neurodiverse resource into the industry through STEM, because there's a massive overlay with neurodiverse candidates. So I think there's massive opportunity for us. But we need to recognize that we're playing in a very competitive market. So we've got to make ourselves attractive, right? How do we, as a big heavy metal provider to the mining industry, attract great resource? So I'm lucky that I work for a business that's got a clear purpose, and it absolutely has a clear purpose. I'm lucky that I work for a business where the chief exec wants us all to look back on a career where we've actually fulfilled the best work of our lives, right? So that's really quite unique, quite novel. And again, as I said earlier, everything that Weir does is about moving less rock, using less energy, less water, and creating less waste. And we all know that it is the purpose of our business. We want to make mining better and more sustainable. And, if we all come to work and we do our jobs, then we're a successful place, we improve the industry, but we genuinely can improve the planet, and that's really cool.
Why do you find your role so satisfying? What is it about that?
Because we can make a difference. And I think we are making a difference. I'm a dad, I'm a granddad, got grandchildren, they're 4 and 5, and actually got a responsibility, like we all have, to think about the world that we're leaving, right? I'm in my role for a moment in time. We're custodians of this moment in time, and we got a responsibility, I think, to try and leave things better than when we found them. And again, I'm just really lucky that I work for a brilliant organization that actually trusts me to go and do that, and actually encourages me to go and do that, as it does with the other 12,000 people that Weir employs.
Sean, when we're thinking about attracting these
Yes.
innovations and new minds, how are we going to do that, and what kind of opportunities are there?
So it's really interesting listening to Stuart talk about it, and it sounds very inspiring. There's something I write down at the top of every notebook I start, which is words matter. And it really struck me when I've worked around the world, and one of these biggest challenges we have is attracting good people, and you see the numbers and the statistics are scary of the decline. And the problem is we, and I say we use we generally, but we talk so much of this down. Steel in the UK and globally has been talked down as an industry. It's an industry in decline. You see the headlines, you hear people talking about it. Why do I want to go and work in an industry that's in decline? It is just not attractive. And we can say, I worked in these companies, and I can be like, wow, they're amazing. But they'll be looking at you going, well, they would say that. I've read this, or I've seen this in the news, or so-and-so celebrity or influencer or anyone else out there telling you why these industries are in decline. And that has an impact. It matters. It gets into the youngsters' psyche in terms of, I don't want to go and work in there. And it's the same with energy more and more, sadly, as well. And I find this really sad that more and more you're getting this bashing of, anti-wind, anti-net zero, anti-solar. There's a problem with this. There's a problem with that. And I'm not ideological with it. Wind and solar has a role to play. It has some big challenges, but so does coal and gas. So does nuclear. They all have their challenges. But, we have this sometimes habit of just talking things down. And what I would love to see is actually talking it up, trying to be a bit more upbeat and positive to say, this is an industry that there is an opportunity. This is an industry, this is a sector that can do great things. It's important. So how do we unlock it?
And is that younger generation, even sort of prior to university at the moment, but the more like your grandchildren, Stuart, sort of 4 or 5 years old, how important is that younger generation in terms of getting those minds into the industry, but also engaging them more broadly?
I think it's absolutely that. If we're going to change things, it's going to be more than the three of us. It's going to be more the industry. We need everybody to understand it. And it is the demand piece, right? It's about understanding. You can't change anything unless you understand it. And, it's not about protest. It's about understanding, making balanced decisions and making balanced choices.
So as we start to bring this podcast, this episode to a close, we've heard about the technical and the systemic changes that you believe are needed. But what about that human side? What's it going to take in terms of leadership or collaboration or public will to really deliver this green steel that the world needs to support the energy transition and the growing population?
So I think, as I said at the start, really, that it's that coming together. It's everyone acting together. It is people listening to this podcast right now telling their politicians, you need to set the policy framework to unlock this. So I think it really requires the consumer to say they only going to buy the latest model, the latest car, if it's using green steel. But similarly, it's the businesses going, you know what, if we're going to be in this game long term, we need to invest and we need to shift and we need to innovate. It's that bottom down, top up approach. It is, if we have both of those sides coming together, pushing, then there is, as we talked about, the solution is there. We're not talking about a mythical solution or a non-existent one. There, we just need to deliver it.
Stuart.
So everything that Sean said, I agree with. I do think there's personally, I think there's more of a play for consumers than there is government, because governments change, right? And for government, it's more of a popularity contest, shall we say? So, I think the consumers do have a role to play, particularly with big automotive, right? Not so much infrastructure, but I think as well we've got to be realistic and keep in mind that it has to be cost effective, right? So if we get the numbers right, it will also drive the change. So I think that there's a piece there within the industry, within the supply chain, that really, really actively drives the change. But we've got to communicate and just really, really make it easier for people to understand the whole dynamic of the whole industry.
And finally, can you paint a picture, both of you, of what the world could really look like if we can be successful and transition to 100% green steel? Is that even realistically possible? And can green steel be fully carbon neutral? And we've discussed how it needs to be green steel, but is that realistically possible to have 100% green steel? And what could it mean for industries and communities worldwide? Stuart?
So I think it is possible. And I just see a significantly cleaner world. I mean, the numbers would suggest if we can get to carbon neutrality in steel manufacture, then that's a 9% reduction in global carbon. I mean, that's a big number. It's that, so cleaner air. But I think not only that, to get there, we will have increased the awareness across the whole piece. And we will have increased the awareness of consumption and recycling in more minerals other than iron. So I just think if we're there, it's a different world anyway, because everyone's embraced it and everyone understands that recycling has its place. But it's about that whole portfolio of solutions. So primary, let's do that better. Recycling, let's do that better. Let's be more thoughtful about how we use it, how we consume it, what we want from our suppliers. So if we achieve it, let's aim to do that. The world will be better, for sure.
Sean, a final word from you. Is it possible, and how will the world be?
Yeah, I mean, as we've said, steel's the backbone of our society. Get that right. It's the catalyst for everything else. It touches every part of the way we travel, the way we live in our homes, the way we interact with our business, everything. Steel is the backbone of it all. Therefore, we decarbonise that. It's not just the 9% saving, it's the fact that it's the catalyst then for the auto sector, it's the catalyst for transport, energy. It is the catalyst that can be so good in us hitting that. And I don't want to go all kind of utopian on you, but it is fantastic. There are jobs, there are local benefits. It's regrowing our industrial heartlands. There's so much good. It's frustrating because it makes so much sense. I just hope that we continue to collaborate, to continue to push, continue to talk about it, continue to innovate so that we can get there.
Sean, Stuart, it's been such a pleasure to have you both in to talk about green steel today. And thank you so much for bringing your expertise and passion in.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
That brings us to the end of this episode of Mindshift. A huge thank you to our guests for sharing their insights and helping us understand what it'll take to build a more sustainable supply of steel, one that can meet growing demand without compromising our future. And of course, thank you to you, our listeners, for being part of the conversation. I hope today's episode has shed light on the scale of the challenge and opportunity when it comes to producing green steel. Next time, we'll be leading the charge, diving into batteries and the metals that power them, lithium, nickel and cobalt. We'll explore how these critical materials are central to electrifying transport, storing renewable energy and accelerating the energy transition. Do join us again then. Bye-bye.